Welcome. I think that was the bell, right? I think so. But it's Monday. It's rainy. We'll just move right into it, all that stuff. How was our weekend? Got some good highlights? Or lowlights, maybe? Any good highlights? That's a highlight. Cleaned your room. That's big. All right, good. I did not think yesterday it would take me 3 hours to go through my little work area in the garage, but it did. So I was surprised. I threw some stuff out, but that was huge. I did on Friday. I did donate some blood on Friday. So I was here at school, and student council had walked around and solicit some support for that. I did, but the first, I get that in itself, that even can be a highlight and a low light. Highlight, giving blood, all right, and perhaps finding out, do I have the the COVID antibodies in my system? But I don't know, since I've been vaccinated as well. Low light could be first time since 1985. I've been doing this since 1985, giving some blood. First time ever had a nurse not find my vein. So that was an experience. Seemed like it took forever. They had to get another person over. So I was talking with Mr. Presnell, and he's like, "Oh, you got the student. You got the kind of the student in training, or the one that's training." It's like, yeah, I guess so. I think the student council member that was with me, he was not doing so well as the nurse is trying to find that vein. And I've got some pretty healthy veins. You can, they're like popping right there to please, find it. But oh well, it happened. Move on. Feel good. Next time I can give is now in June. All that. Okay. So with that, anything else? So this week, how many days are we together? 3. We're together 3. We're together 3. Friday is, I believe, a Flex Friday as well. But who knows, that can change. Tomorrow is ACT, so we will not have a live Google Meet. Tomorrow will be an asynchronous day, learning day. So when we start today, you'll be working on that during class. Okay, so don't have to worry about that. This week, we'll take a look at the Cold War as it expands and goes global to the different regions. And then next week, take a look at how it comes to a conclusion. All right, so we still got a few things out there that we need to put into our grade book for 3.1. So stay on top of it, all right? Deadlines, we know. Next Thursday, let's try to hit those deadlines. All right, if you're going to struggle with that, please let me know. All right. So we've been looking at the Cold War, and last week the steps to the Cold War. And I think what we learned early on here in this rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union is what is at the core of this rivalry. Ideology seems to be the core. And then all around it, we've got some issues that can make it hot, or issues that become very passionate, like nuclear weapons. And that was, I was talking with my daughter last week about nuclear weapons in regards to climate change. And we're thinking, how in the heck is that possible? Well, the United States had a military base in Greenland. All right, and typically when we know about Greenland, it's climate kind of cold. Typically has been, but it's been warming up. We had a military base in Greenland, and we abandoned it in the 1960s. But our thinking was Greenland, it's cold, it's got a lot of ice, the ground's frozen. We won't have to worry about any hazardous materials. So we've got some hazardous materials at this abandoned base. Some of it could be nuclear as well. And we're thinking it's going to be frozen forever. But now with climate change, things are warming up and Greenland is changing. And so now potentially a Cold War base now might become hot because it could be a hazardous waste disaster. So we might have to go back to Greenland and clean up our little mess that we have. Oops. So, all right, getting a little bit back on track here. So issues like nuclear weapons can make this Cold War very, very hot, but also leaders. We have some leadership changes. In the 1950s, in the United States, we go from Harry Truman to who's going to be our president in the 1950s in the United States. We go from Truman to, what was that? Nope, not Kennedy. Gotta have some older guy. Eisenhower. Okay, then we got so goes Truman, then Eisenhower, and then in the 1960s we'll have a couple of them. We'll have Kennedy and Johnson. In the Soviet Union, it moves from Stalin to who? Guy likes to take his shoe off and bang it on the table all the time. It's a hot mess. Khrushchev. There we go. Khrushchev. All right. And so, but he emerges out of a power struggle. We think, though, you know, when you have leadership changes, sometimes it's a new direction. Oh, and sometimes, you know, maybe things might get a little better. And in the 1950s, at least on surface, it kind of looked like we were going to get a little better. We'd have summits, we meet periodically, but we find out no. Ideology is pretty hard line. Our Cold War methods might change. You know, you've got with Eisenhower a new look foreign policy, and for Khrushchev, you got this idea of peaceful coexistence. All right. If we had this new look in peaceful coexistence and it looked like we were warming up relations, then why in the heck did nuclear arsenals become bigger and the Cold War get hotter in a variety of proxy wars that happen? All right, and it will. From the 1950s all the way up to its end, we are going to have some hot wars, and they are going to be proxy wars in which the ideology is going to play out. Simple as that. You know, Truman, he could have ran for another term. The 22nd Amendment had been passed, but he's the incumbent president, it didn't apply to him. So he could have ran again in 1952. He took over in 45 when Roosevelt died, got reelected in 48. He could have ran in 52. That could have put him in there for at least 11 years. And the most a person can be in office is 10. But again, he was the incumbent, so it didn't necessarily apply to him. He chose not to, and a lot of it has to do with Cold War. What is going on with the Cold War is contributing to that piece. All right. I did say we'll come back to Germany periodically, and we will. So this activity that we're going to start today, I do want to bring in Germany, and more specifically Berlin. Remember, brain fart here, Winston Churchill, he had talked about a what? Iron Curtain. Now in 1961, that Iron Curtain is going to become a physical barrier. And we got to go to Berlin, all right, from 58 to 61, and one could say even all the way up to 63, Berlin is going to be at the center of a Cold War crisis, all right? And so I've got a little video clip here that's going to show us how Die Mauer is created, how the wall is created, and how it impacts people. I had told my first hour, I had a classmate of mine, her father, when he was like a teenager, he was from East Berlin, from the East German sector. And when the Soviets were beginning to close up the area, as well as the East Germans, I should say the East Germans are closing up the area because the Soviets give them the green light. He and his family had escaped through the subway tunnel. in East Berlin. They hadn't closed those up yet. So when the wall goes up, doesn't necessarily mean everything is shut yet right away. And we'll see that play out in this video clip here. All right, as we watch it again, think of some takeaways, right? Those at home, think of some.
At the end of World War II, the city of Berlin lay in ruins. Germany's devastated capital represented the evil that had been Nazism. The winners of the war divided Germany and its capital, Berlin, among themselves. The Soviet Union would occupy and control East Germany, a brand new country that promised to show the world why socialism was the best political system. West Germany, called the Federal Republic, would be occupied by the Americans, British, and French, who would establish a new democratic government that stood in direct opposition to communism. But what to do with Berlin itself wasn't so simple. The city lay deep within Soviet-occupied East Germany. The US and Britain refused to give it up, so an awkward compromise was reached. Berlin would be divided among the victors. The eastern half of the city would be controlled by the Soviets, the western half by the other allies. That left West Berlin a non-communist island within a communist nation. Almost immediately, East Germans began to emigrate from their socialist nation to rebuild their lives in Western Germany. And many of them did it simply by crossing the border within the city of Berlin, from the east to the west. By 1961, East Germany had lost millions of its citizens through West Berlin.
And if you could get from Germany into Berlin and from East Berlin into West Berlin, you could be resettled. And this is an option that between 1945 and 1961, about 2.5 million East Germans took that didn't like life under communism, they didn't like the lack of prospects, they didn't like the lack of political freedom, and they voted with their feet.
This is Daniel Shore in West Berlin. This is a subway station. It is also an escape hatch.
Daniel Shore was the CBS News correspondent in Germany.
The number of people coming over was staggering. It was like a stampede in progress.
One refugee out of East Germany every 3 minutes. And for all we know, you could be looking at one.
Continued loss of its labor force threatened East Germany's economic survival. Party Secretary Walter Ulbricht knew the hemorrhage of human talent had to be stopped. The question was, how?
What he wanted was a wall, a fence, a barrier down the middle of Berlin, making it impossible for East Germans physically to cross. And that would solve this problem. They couldn't go anywhere.
In public, Ulbricht denied he would ever seal the border.
Niemand hat die Absicht, eine Mauer zu errichten.
But in the summer of 1961, he secretly ordered a young, ambitious party official named Erich Honecker to head up a covert feat of engineering. Honecker commandeered barbed wire and concrete to be stashed in and around Berlin. Then, on a summer Saturday night, while Berliners were on vacation, he sprang the trap. On August 13, 1961, Berliners woke up to a city cut in two.
And by 6 o'clock in the morning, it was all done.
On the Bernauer Strasse, in the north of Berlin, the border closure created an odd situation. The front doors of apartment houses opened onto West Berlin, but the people who lived inside the buildings were East Berliners, and now they would no longer be allowed to use their front doors. Elke Rosin was a 16-year-old East Berliner who lived in an apartment on Bernauer Straße. 4 days after the border was sealed, Elke's father gathered the family together.
It was in the late afternoon. My father, my parents told us about 1 hour earlier that we wanted to escape, and so we had to find some things to take with us. We put it in boxes and in some bags, and that's me when I was running.
For Elke and her family, escape meant dashing out the front door of their building and crossing the street to safety before the East German police could snatch them back. While her father locked the apartment door to keep the police from following, then leapt from the window. They were lucky they left when they did, and lucky they lived on the first floor. The border guards soon caught on, and others on Bernauer Straße had a much harder time.
Yeah, many people lost their life, because of this strange situation.
Within weeks, all the windows and doors on the street were bricked over.
Something I had never seen before, and very few people have seen before, is to see a city cut through a center. It is really awful.
In mid-October 1961, 2 months after the border closure, the Americans in West Berlin decided to test the resolve of the East Germans and their Soviet masters. An American official from West Berlin challenged the East German border guards by refusing to show his papers at the crossing, and a dangerous standoff began.
Very soon, tanks appeared on the other side, Soviet tanks. And then for a while at Checkpoint Charlie, you could see American and Soviet tanks head to head. I went and stood between tanks. And looking at my camera, I said, look at this picture. This could be a picture of the way World War III starts.
The whole world watched Berlin for a tense 48 hours. Then, after delicate negotiations between Moscow and Washington, both sides backed down. The standoff at Checkpoint Charlie was the last time U.S. forces openly opposed the Soviets over the Berlin Wall. It took Berliners months to absorb the reality of living in this divided city. But no one dreamed it would take 28 years to knock that barrier down. As the reality of the wall sank in, Berliners on both sides made their accommodations. In West Berlin, platforms were built alongside the wall so divided families could at least see one another. One of those waiting from the west was a young father named Rudolf Müller. He had been working in West Berlin the day the border was closed. His wife and 2 boys were stuck in the east.
So, after considering the options, at some point, we decided to dig a tunnel to get my family over here.
Müller knew there was an idle construction site in West Berlin right next to the wall. With the help of his brothers and some friends, he began a small tunnel that would end in the basement of an apartment house across the street in East Berlin.
The tunnel itself began over here,
Hinter dem Bauzaun.
behind that construction
Wir
fence.
gingen circa 2 Meter runter.
Went down 2 meters and then right across, right here.
Hier, wo der
Here where you see that indentation in the ground. There's that tunnel
Der
underneath.
Tunnel, der wurde ja nicht befestigt.
It was never secured.
Hörten gleichzeitig auch die
And we heard the border
Grenzsoldaten,
patrols on the
die
sidewalk.
hier lang auf die Bürgersteige und patrouillieren.
So we had to be incredibly quiet.
They dug every night for 3 weeks and finally broke through into the apartment house basement on the east side of the wall. Mueller climbed out to get his family and another couple he had promised to help and bring them back to the tunnel. It all should have gone smoothly, but almost immediately, one of the East German border guards challenged them.
Hier an dieser Stelle stand der Posten.
Right here is where the
Der
guard
sah
was
uns
standing.
natürlich kommen und
He saw us coming,
schon gesagt,
and he
"Also,
yelled,
halt
"Stop!
stehen bleiben, wo
Where are you
wollen
trying to go?"
Only years later did Mueller figure out that he may have been betrayed, that the other couple he was helping escape were in fact agents of the East German secret police. But the guards didn't know. Mueller was armed.
Hob seine Waffe leicht an. Ich beobachtete
He raised the weapon slightly. I was watching him. I couldn't keep my eyes off him.
rief ganz laut, "Halt stehen bleiben."
And he yelled loudly, "Stop! Where are you trying to go?"
Ich war also erst erschrocken.
I was shocked. My hair was standing on end. I was so afraid.
Ich sagte dann, drehte mich sagte zu meiner Frau, "Geht
I
ihr
turned
weiter,
around and
geht
said to my
weiter,
wife,
bleibt
"You
nicht
keep
stehen."
going. Don't stop.
Meine
Don't
Brüder
stop.
sind hinter dieser Mauer
My brothers are on the
draufgegangen.
other side of the wall, and they're waiting for
Und
you."
ich drehte mich
So I turned
Auf
around,
dieser Stelle hier. Drehte ich mich
right
um
around
und
here,
dort
and over there, where that line is in the asphalt. That's where the
stand
border guard
dann
was.
dieser Grenzsoldat, guckte mich an,
He looked at me. I'll never forget.
nie vergessen,
His face was all white from the excitement.
Aufregung wohl, guckte mich an und wo wollen Sie
"Where are you
hin?
trying to go? Show your papers."
Und da meine Frau und die Kinder
And
weiter-
because my wife and my children kept going, he felt provoked or
Ich
whatever.
weiß nicht was, riss seine Maschine
He raised his machine gun
und
and
schrie
screamed
schon.
this time,
Die
"Your
Frau
wife
und
and
Kinder
children
bleiben
have to
stehen
stop,
oder ich schieße.
or I'll shoot."
Ich dachte, ich versuchte mit meinem Körper
I tried to take his view, but when I saw the barrel of his machine gun,
von dieser Maschine
I had a gun myself. That's when it happened. I thought, you have to shoot, or he shoots your family.
Schieß auf deine Frau und die Kinder. Und dann hab ich abgedrückt.
He was standing there with his weapon up,
Als ich
and I
die
shot.
Waffe so hoch und ich drückte ab, dann machte er so.
The guard died, whether from Mueller's one shot or the hail of bullets let loose by other guards. No one knows.
Es war
It was a long time ago, but every time I talk about it, I still get chills up and down my spine.
geht's mir immer noch rauf und runter.
I never expected anything like this. It was horrible. Horrible that a young person had to die.
Furchtbar, dass da ein junger Mensch auch umgekommen ist bei.
Desperate escape attempts became commonplace, and many succeeded.
In Berlin, escaping East Germans punched holes in the wall of shame with homemade bombs in trucks.
Others did not. About 1 year after the wall went up, 18-year-old Peter Fechter and a friend made a run at the fence near Checkpoint Charlie. Fechter's friend made it over, but the guard's automatic weapon fire caught Peter in the leg as he scaled the fence, and he slipped back to the ground. The bullet had severed an artery.
West Berliners hear his cries, but are helpless. Communists who can help wait until Peter Fechter bleeds to death, then carry him away.
The GDR authorities issued new orders that anyone wounded while attempting to escape be removed from public view immediately. And they beefed up the wall, making it higher, broader, longer, until it extended 96 miles surrounding West Berlin. And in most places, it was 12 feet tall. But that was how it looked from the west, the free side. Easterners saw it differently.
If you were in East Berlin and you walked towards the border with West Berlin, if you were in a park or a street, whatever, you would come up against a wall right in the middle of the street with a warning sign, often nothing much more than that. If you then climb that wall, went over and dropped down, you would find yourself between 60 and 90 yards from West Berlin. And not just that, immediately in front of you was what they called the security border fence. This was a wired fence about 8 feet high, strengthened at the bottom so you couldn't crawl underneath. You had to climb it. And when you climbed it, you set off an alarm. You might, if it were night in certain parts of the border, also set off an automatic searchlight that would start sweeping the area.
Watchtowers stood every few hundred meters, manned by heavily armed soldiers.
They would know there was somebody trying to cross the security fence. You're over the security fence, sirens have started to go, the guards have probably started shouting out warnings and are preparing fire if necessary.
The next obstacle to freedom was the death strip, a no man's land with carefully raked sand designed to show footprints, and dogs on long leashes that would catch up with even the fastest runner. Some of it was covered by automatic machine guns rigged to tripwires.
Only then, only after you had managed to get across the death strip without being shot, savaged by a dog, did you reach what they called not the wall at all, not what tourists in West Berlin would call the wall, but what they called the border marker.
Finally, 90 yards from the first innocuous fence, this was the 12-foot-high concrete barrier the Westerners saw, topped with a cylinder of smooth cement that made it nearly impossible to grip.
And if you managed to get over that by some miraculous method, then you were in West Berlin. How many people managed that? The answer is hardly anybody. People got through on trucks, they dug tunnels, they flew over it, they went around it, they used false papers. But very, very few people in the 1970s and 80s managed to get through not the Berlin Wall, but the multiplicity of walls that made up the Berlin Wall between East and West Berlin.
Initial reactions to Die Mauer, to the wall?
Technology support the wall. I was surprised that they trying to grab the wall and shoot at you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very sophisticated, a lot of technology. And when we think of the wall itself, I mean, there are many layers to it. You have that 90, what they said was it the 90 yards or the 90 feet? It was 90 yards. That in between, realistically, the barriers, and that is where it gets hot and heavy, and very, very extremely difficult. Yes.
I just find it interesting concept of keeping the people in your country. Like, it reminds me a lot of like we learned about North Korea.
Yep.
I always was surprised like that why a country would feel the need to like use their military and all that technology to like keep people.
Okay.
It's just surprising.
It's a good point. And John F. Kennedy, and when he gives his Ich bin ein Berliner speech, would talk about you know, the imperfections of democracy, but we don't have to build a barrier to keep people. And so, in many ways, when you look at that wall that goes up, in many ways, for us, we look at that as a symbol of failure. Because you're trying to create this paradise, this worker paradise, and the only way to create it is you got to create a physical barrier to do that. Walter Ulbricht, the East German chancellor, felt this is the only option that he has. Because what was happening? Yeah, they were just leaving. They were just leaving, and there was nothing that was preventing them. They could just simply walk from one sector to the other, unimpeded, and do that. And they will do that. And, you know, once the wall goes up, for the Allied powers, for the United States, once the United States got assurances that the land corridor between West Berlin and West Germany could remain open, yeah, you know, you got security and all that stuff, but you could fly into West Berlin, or you can do the land barrier. Once that assurances was still going to remain open, as it said in the video clip, the Berlins basically become almost a peaceful situation. The hostilities seem to go away, and both the United States president and the Soviet premier or the Soviet leader said, okay, fine, you know, we can focus on something else besides Berlin for all that. All right, wow. Okay. Malia in the chat had said that her dad lived 2 miles away from the Iron Curtain in Hungary, and he explained it very similar to how they described it. So again, you know, we have, you know, brings a whole different light when you have a personal anecdotal evidence to go with that. That's huge. That's huge. You know, as a student at the University of Minnesota, when all this is going on, you know, I'm at the U of M from 85 to 90. I mean, this is right here. Cold War is coming to a conclusion, but you have a lot of tension. And what brings down the Berlin Wall? It's going to be some internal issues that's happening in East Germany, but then also in Eastern Europe, and Hungary is a part of it, and Czechoslovakia becomes part of that as well, and Poland becomes part of this, and policy changes by the Soviets. Huge. Anything else? Anything else? Any other takeaways here? You know, when the Soviet and the U.S. tanks were facing off with each other, and then eventually an agreement is made between the two superpowers, it's very interesting how they pulled the tanks away. It wasn't like all of a sudden saying, all right, Nate, fire up the tank, let's go. It would be more like, okay, we're going to back up 100 feet. You're going to back up 100 feet. Yeah, you know, they're going to do that, or it's kind of a face with each other. It's a Cold War drama at its finest. Okay, so thanks for listening to that and participating. Now what I want you to do here is let's go to Schoology Cold War Crisis Activity, the folder. That's the only thing that we see in this week. If you open it up, you'll see the assignment and a slew of handouts, which are going to be helpful depending on the case studies that you look at, the crisis that you look at. We'll use these, and our textbook becomes helpful. And if you open up the activity, it does allow you to work with some historical buddies. All right, another historical buddy, I should say. And what we want to do is see how this rivalry plays out in the different regions around the world. Because again, the United States and the Soviets, we're not really going to be fighting each other, but we're going to fight against each other through other means. In this case, proxy wars. And so you can again work with a historical buddy or solo. All right. Then we have 4 regions: Americas, Africa, Middle East, Europe, and Asia. And what you need to do from that is pick 3. So you might decide to focus on the Americas, Europe, and Asia, or Americas, whatever combination. It's got to be 3 of the 4. And then you're not doing all the countries inside the region. You're focusing on one of them. So again, so if I pick Americas, maybe you focus on Chile. If I picked Africa and the Middle East, maybe I focus on Afghanistan. All right. And then maybe if I picked Asia, I'm going to focus on Vietnam. All right. Now, it's important that you do pay attention to the year that's associated with the country, because that's what we want to focus on. Vietnam, we're not interested necessarily the French debacle in Vietnam. We're focusing more on the United States. And here again, if Afghanistan, we're focusing on the Soviets and the communist Afghanistan government against the rebels, which the United States is backing at this point. It's very interesting to think that Afghanistan realistically has been at a state of conflict since 1979 up to today. So, you know, if we struggle dealing with, the COVID pandemic about a year, imagine living in Afghanistan dealing with conflict since 1979. That's huge, right? Big stuff. All right. So you got 4 regions. You pick 3. In each region, there are multiple events, but you pick 1. But now you have 4 choices here of how this thing should look like, all right, with criteria. If you feel like doing a newspaper, you go ahead, but you got to have at least 9 articles, because there are three general ideas that you got to focus on for each of the crises. That's how we eventually arrive at 9. Brochure, newscast, or social media posts. You can do this electronically, or you can do this on paper. You know, if you do it on paper, I'll see it eventually from you as you walk through the door on Monday of next week. We're going to have all of this week to work on this. This will be our focus. We want to look at the causes. What's bringing this thing on? Is it something internally within the Congo, or is it because of what the superpowers are doing, or maybe it's a combo? Conflict, how does it play out? Many of these are going to involve conventional type wars, but I shouldn't say many of them. Some of them are going to have a combination conventional, but also guerrilla. All right. And then the significance. How does this affect the countries involved? And then how does it affect the Cold War in general? All right. You know, up to Korea, everything seemed to be going on in Europe, and then Korea happens. Now the Cold War is exported to Asia. I'm going to hang out there for a little while. And then eventually it comes back to Europe, and then maybe it goes out into the world, wherever the crisis happens. All right. And you have, of course, the BHQ. There's 2 of them here, but you only focus on one of them. Focus on one. All right. So 1 BHQ, you got 3 of these case studies you need to focus on. They got to come from different regions, and you got multiple ways to do this. All right. So if you decide to do a brochure, it's going to cover it all. It's not just a brochure for Cuba, newspaper for Suez Canal, and social media posts for Berlin. Okay. Questions with that? Comments with that? Any questions at home? All right. So first you got to decide, solo or with a partner, then figure out which regions, and then within the regions, which one of the crises from that region I'm going to focus on, and then also figure out what your finished product's going to be. In my head, Monday through Wednesday, we will. That's R&D time. Thursday, Friday, put this thing together. That's in my head. All right. With that, if there's no questions, I'll cut you loose, and you have a great. Those at home have a great day. Those that are here, let's just dig in and work on it.